think it always felt to me like the biggest thing that's missing from a big social encounter is not so much the idea of one check or more checks, but the idea of the ebb and flow. This idea that things can go back and forwards. You can lose ground and use ground and gain ground in a debate.
For an example, if you want to look at a dramatic scene that really has a ton of ebb and flow in it, the end of the Maltese Falcon, where Sam Spade, the Humphrey Bogart character, is telling the Mary Astor character that he's not going to play the staff for her, that even though he's in love with her, she's the killer and he's going to send her to jail instead of going to jail on her behalf. And they're both using all these different tactics on one another throughout the thing. So even though you sort of feel that the result is preordained, you don't ever worry that Humphrey Bogart is going to crack and give in to Mary Astor. Still, the different tactics just keep flying, and if you break it down, there's like, 40, 50, 60 different things that they're doing in there, and in a way, it's actually way more complicated than any fight scene, especially from a movie of that era, would ever have been.
Now, there's something you mentioned earlier about this idea of bringing crunch, essentially, to the idea of dramatic narrative. There's a constant dialogue that goes on it seems to me, in the role-playing industry in general, or perhaps in role-playing fandom, as much as the industry, between this idea of sort of the dice role player and the role player. This idea that you've got these kind of two distinct philosophies of gaming, and that you either have to be a crunch person or you have to be a character person. And it really feels to me like throughout all the games I've seen you work on, the various stuff you do, it seems like you're always trying to bridge those two gaps. You're always trying to bring those two sides of things together somehow.
Yeah, I think in a way that's kind of a false dichotomy, or perhaps a less important dichotomy than in what direction you think about story. We've been trained, partly because of, as you said, the evolution of role-playing comes from war games and rules crunch, and partly because people are sort of steeped in speculative fiction, which breaks a lot of other storytelling rules that are used in almost any other story. But we tend to, in gaming, create a logical set of parameters and then try and have an interesting story arise from that logical set of parameters, whether it's a rule set or just a lot of information about the world and what makes sense in the world. Well, that's not how people think when they set out to create stories. What they think about is they start out with characters who want something, and they then create a pattern of how the audience's hopes and fears modulate as the story goes on, and they're trying to create an emotional effect. And then they create the logic to underpin that. So it's like, well, I need a scene here where my character suffers a defeat. Well, then I'm going to go back to the logic of the world and say, okay, how would that happen? And so it's really sort of a perhaps a more interesting or more illuminating dichotomy is the one between, building up from a core logic without really thinking about story structure, or having story structure then create your logic. And a lot of people are afraid of the word story structure because they associate that with uncollaborative storytelling GMs who have a scripted narrative that they impose on their players. Railroading, which makes a lot of people really nervous because they have had bad experiences and they didn't get to put input. And so one of the things that you have to do if you're interested in infusing story technique into role-playing is address that and make sure that it's collaborative and make sure that it's more about story making than about storytelling.
I think what you're saying about the idea of essentially the purpose of story is to affect the audience is really interesting in relation to role-playing, because we have this incredible dichotomy where the audience is the authors, and so they have to have input, but they have to be affected by the story simultaneously.
Exactly. And so you have issues of control that are both creative control and emotional control, and it's not necessarily always clear whether you are upset because the story isn't going your way creatively or because you're identifying with your character and he's in a bad place. And I think that is the strength of role-playing as a medium, and that's what makes it interesting as a story form, dare I say it, as an art form. And that contradiction is something that that we have to embrace and understand.
Just thinking of something, sort of moving on to something else you've been doing, another project I just wanted to talk to you quickly about, which is another very collaborative experience. I've been following Corad, your crowdsourced role-playing game on your site. How's that been turning out? Has that been going the way you expected it to? Have there been surprises there so far?
Yes, and again, that really filters into the whole bottom-up versus top-down logic. So we're seeing sort of factions of people in the comments trying to move the setting that we're sort of creating collectively towards something that's very super logic-based and building it from the ground up. For example, I thought that we would start with the political structures, which is, when I eventually becomes a play-by-blog game, that's what it's going to be about, is clashing ideologies in a world where the old ideology is falling away and new ones are coming in to take their place and are jostling with one another as well as with the crumbling ideology. So I thought we would start with politics and culture, but it turned out that the crowd collectively was very interested in starting with topography. Let's start with the world. Right, the physical reality of the world. And it's also been interesting in terms of, I'm making it up as I go along in terms of how do I solicit input from the group in a way that doesn't give disproportionate influence to the most excited people who are willing to spend the most time coming up with ideas without, on the other hand, invalidating the people who are most interested. So there's sort of an activist bias that I am continuing to have to deal with. So I'm, so far very surprised with some weeks I'm very surprised by the decisions they make, like the decision to focus on geography first, and other times I'm, this week's questions are about how important you want this sort of surprise element of the world that is developed as people have riffed on these different ideas. There's these water stones apparently in the world, which I had nothing to do with creating, but the commenters just
sort of found those. Like, whoa, what happened?
And there's some people who are really devoted to the mechanics of how those work. And so the question was, again, addressing the activist bias, was, does the group at large, are they as invested in the importance of these water stones as this group of people who are tossing comments back and forth are? And I wasn't sure what the results would be, and the vote is still going on, but it seems like, people want to edge back from that a little and make it less important. And also, there's been a group of people who really want to have these logically extrapolated, and other people who, are uncomfortable with the level of logic building of, we're starting with the mechanics of how this magical or unearthly thing starts. Well, how does that relate to people? What is the emotional impact of that? So it very much feeds into this broader theme we've been talking about.
Do you see this feeding into how you develop, how you write your settings of the future? Do you see this being a tool that you want to use, or is it just more of an experiment at this point?
It's an experiment, and I have no idea where it's going to go or what I'm going to learn from it, which of course is the point of experiments. The end point of it will at least be that there is a setting document that we'll make available through, we'll just make it public domain, and anybody can do anything they want with it, and it'll be interesting to see if anyone wants to, or whether, in fact, that the process is more interesting than the result, and it was really what we learned about what people are interested in is what's interesting more so than the world. Or maybe a bunch of people will take it and base games on it or base fiction on it. We'll see what happens.
All right, sounds interesting. So your blog is on Robin D. Laws?
It's Robin_D. Laws. Live journal, or just Google Robin D. Laws. It's the first thing that comes up.
There you go, guys. Google Robin D. Laws. Easy enough. Check out Korad. Very interesting attempt to create a crowdsourced RPG setting, which you guys can get in on. And take a look at Hamlet's Hit Points. That book is out in the stores right now.
It is in stores. It's available electronically from your favorite purveyor of gaming PDFs. And you can order it directly from gameplaywright.net.
And of course, you've also got a new Pathfinder novel coming out.
Coming out in May. It's called The World Wound Gambit. It's a fantasy heist novel.
Which sounds like something I definitely want to read.
I'm just in revisions on it now, and it's a blast. I'm really excited about it.
All right, thank you for taking time to talk to us, Robin.
Okay.
I hope you have a great time at the con.
Okay.